civilians. On the 27th of July, a drone attacked a car in the Shebekino district, killing a man and injuring his spouse. A similar attack took place in Yasny Zori, injuring one man. On the 29th of July, a drone attack killed a car driver, injuring his spouse in Leonovka, the Bryansk region. On the 23rd of July, Ukrainian Nazis deliberately attacked a civilian car using kamikaze drone, injuring a man as well as a woman and a 7-year-old child. On the 26th of July, a drone injured a civilian in the settlement of Kamensky Hutor. On the 28th of July, a drone attacked a car in Podlesny Novoselki, injuring a man. The DPR. On the 24th of July, a drone attacked a motorcycle, injuring a woman. Explosive object detonated in Fedorovka, injuring a child that was born in 2013. On the 25th of July, an enemy once again had an MLRS shelling. On the 24th of July, the drone attacked an ambulance car in the Zaporozhye region. This car was going to the city of Pologi to rescue those attacked on the road. It killed a driver, injuring a paramedic and a nurse. In Energodar, a drone attack killed 2 civilians and injured 2. On the 26th of July, Ukrainian drones made a targeted attack on another ambulance car, injuring a patient and a driver. On the 28th of July, the attack on a residential house in Vasilievka injured a 2-year-old kid. The Krasnodar region at night on the 24th of July, immediately after the 3rd round of Russia-Ukraine negotiations in Istanbul, the enemy cynically attacked Sochi Adler and the neighborhood, and as a result of pieces of a drone crashed on a car, killing 2 women, injuring 13 persons. At the Kursk region, on the 24th of July, Ukrainian drone attacked a private house in the settlement of Suhaya, killing 85-year-old woman. Close to the settlement of Makrushina, there was a strike on a truck, injuring 48-year-old man. Another citizen was wounded in Belovsky district. On the 25th of July, a drone attacked a gas station in the settlement of Borshin. The driver of a harvester stepped on a mine. In the settlement of Giri, a drone affected a motorcycle driver. On the 26th of June, a drone killed a man. According to the Investigative Committee of Russia, victims of Ukrainian Nazism in the Kursk region since its invasion in August 2024 amount to over 330 citizens. Currently, 610 criminal charges are investigated on the crimes of Ukraine in the Kursk region. The Leningrad region, a wreckage of an enemy drone caused a fire, killing a civilian in the Rostov region. And the night on the 29th of July, a drone attack killed a car driver. And there was a fire at the railroad station that was caused. The Kherson region, the 27th of July in Aloshki, an enemy projectile hit a residential house, killing a brain surgeon, injuring his family. The same day, the civil minibus was attacked by a drone, killing 1 civilian and injuring 5 civilians. Another drone had a targeted attack on foresters that were trying to put out a fire. And in Aloshki, from the 24th to the 28th of July, a civilian was killed due to drone attacks, and a woman was injured. Sentences are passed following the similar crimes, and the same sentences would be passed with regard to these crimes. Russian courts are doing that for crimes in the Kursk region against civilians and Russian servicemen. Long-term prison sentences were passed on captive Ukrainian fighters, Igor Boronilo, Yuri Golutenko, and others. They were sentenced to 16 years in jail, 14 years in jail. In absentia was sentenced to mercenaries from Colombia, Venegas, Steven, René Ferreira, Alzate, Oscar, Mauricio Hoyos, as well as mercenaries from France, Sylvain Jules Bernard Colpin, and from the US, Andrew Richard Bruns. 24 years in jail. That's the sentence to mercenary from Paraguay, Rodrigo Cristian Carvalho, and they were put on the international wanted list. The investigative committee of Russia identified over 3,500 mercenaries from 70 countries. They took part in the fighting on the side of Ukrainian Nazism. As of now, charges have been brought regarding 965 fighters, 721 were on international warranted lists, and 134 sentences were passed regarding something that took place on October the 8th, namely the terrorist attack on the Crimean Bridge. 3 terrorists are on a wanted list: Mikhail Tsukala, Denis Kovac, Sergei Drenchenko, and 2 persons from Georgia, Levan Medashvili and Alexander Inazaridze, and all had their charges in absentia. Who is sponsoring all that? Who supplies the so-called defenders of freedom? But actually they are terrorists who are supplying them with weapons. These weapons are Western, and the West is behind that. According to media reports, Berlin allegedly provided to Kiev 3 Patriot surface-to-air missile systems, and there are negotiations with Washington on additional supplies. Reportedly, on the 27th of July, Russian soldiers destroyed one of such systems during the offloading and deployment. Let us note that the life cycle of Western weapons provided to Zelensky in modern conditions is quite short, regardless of what is happening, and despite the Western obsession with inflicting a strategic defeat upon Russia via Ukraine. They're still obsessed, and a high cost is paid by rank-and-file Ukrainians with their lives, and European citizens are paying it from their pockets. And unlike Europeans, the US continues to systematically benefit from the weapons export. Every dollar they provide to Kiev yields benefit to Americans, not just rank-and-file Americans, but those who orchestrated that. Europe, meanwhile, continues to run at a loss, pumping new resources to Kiev net, and the bet on the European military and industrial complex as a driver for the economic growth will only lead to imbalance in the economy and will lead to centrifugal trends in the European Union. Now moving on to Ukraine. As you know, on the 25th of July, Zelensky signed a law to extend the martial law and mobilization in Ukraine up till November 5th. Amid daily failings on the front line and growing social tension fueled by the sponsors of the regime, that are not happy with excessive defiance of the Kiev regime, this mechanism of usurping power can crash. As you know, the drafting rates are slowing down. According to analytics by Lutsenko, the annual decrease in the Ukrainian army amounts to some 10 to 15,000 persons. The retired politician claims that the recorded number of defectors is 16 to 19,000 on a monthly basis, but the real number of defectors is 5 times as high. Besides that, there are some 5 to 8,000 servicemen casualties every month. Let me note that the situation in the Ukrainian army is much worse than this estimate. Indeed, the loss of the Ukrainian army on a monthly basis is many times higher than the statistics. From the 19th to 25th of July alone, the enemy, according to the Russian MOD, lost over 8,650 soldiers. And let me once again mention it. We're talking about the period of 19th to 25th of July, several days' time. Judging by the frontline sketches online, there's a wave of miscontent, and the Ukrainian social networks were outraged at the video of one of the Ukrainian soldiers who was angry because there was not place for the evacuation of wounded in the car. It was awash with goods looted by the Ukrainian army. Reportedly, some of the commanders were not ready to abandon trophies, and as a result, some fighters bled to death. Well, we're just stating facts. We're not sympathizing with them. Moving on to the financial needs of this bloodthirsty regime, the Kiev regime is becoming more unstable because it needs more money influx. The Zelensky regime mentioned his growing appetite on the 25th of July. He demanded additional 65 billion USD per year. 40 billion USD should cover budget deficit. The 25 billion should be spent for electronic warfare systems and drones. The Kiev ringleader already mentioned that he started conversations with European donors on this difficult matter. That means that he started this bakery business that he likes so much, but not for the benefit of his people, but in order to kill the ones that he declares his supporters publicly. He even coined a new term. He said that this weapon that protects everyone should include Ukrainian, wait a minute, Ukrainian soldiers. He's talking about people. Basically, he suggested putting the Ukrainian army on the Western payroll completely. These facts confirm the relevance of our operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine, and all the goals will be implemented, as was repeatedly mentioned by our leadership. Let's take a look at other fronts. For instance, the cultural front line. Since the beginning of the special military operation, the Kiev regime, together with the collective West, unleashed a large-scale slander campaign against our country in order to shape an image of Russia as an ultimate evil that seeks to allegedly destroy the Ukrainian identity, as they put it. According to UNESCO, as of late April, there have been enormous problems. Namely, they were ignored by the international community. I'm talking about actions by the Kiev regime against its objects. According to UNESCO, as of late April, there are 485 sites that have been damaged. Half of them are cultural objects in Russian regions, in the DPR, LPR, Zaporozhye and Kherson regions. Various media outlets via the NGOs that are sponsored by the Western countries as well as the international platforms parrot allegations against the Russian army. They are accused of striking monuments in order to destroy, seize and rewrite the Ukrainian cultural heritage. They come up with bogus stories that Russian side has been destroying and looting museums, theaters. It turns out to be fake news. They are fabricated by the example of the bloody provocation in Bucha, bold headlines in Western and Ukrainian media, and zero evidence. Let me give you some examples of such bogus stories. This disastrous situation, as I've mentioned in the beginning of the briefing, when Ukraine destroys its cultural heritage, is completely ignored by UNESCO, and the statistics is being manipulated. So going back to the facts, the armed forces of Russia were groundlessly accused of blowing up the Donetsk Academic Dramatic Theatre in Mariupol. The Russian MOD noted that on March 16, 2022, there were no mission sorties in that area. Moreover, evidence suggests that all main exits from theatre were blocked from the outside, and a couple of minutes before the explosion, there was a panic inside the building. That means that they saw something that made them take desperate attempts to come outside, and those who managed to go outside using humanitarian corridors claim that Azov sees them as a living shield and that the Azov fighters blew up the building of the theater as they withdrew. And Russian innuendo include many other groundless accusations of our country. The Ukraine army does not have any qualms of using cultural objects as a shield to deploy their troops and equipment, and evidence abound. For instance, in May 2022, it is known that Ukrainian fighters set up firing positions near the Svyatogorsk monastery, and they used churchmen and believers as a living shield. As they withdrew, they set up on fire the wooden skit of All Saints, and they impeded clergy and followers to stop the fire. They have this example in Khatyn. And who did that? These were not just German Nazi. They were Western Ukrainian Bandera supporters and henchmen. Since the beginning of the special military operation till December 2024, the Ukrainian attacks affected at least 457 cultural objects, including the attack on the Moscow Kremlin on May 3, 2023. 744 temples, chapels, and church buildings were injured. 164 are not to be rebuilt. At the same time, Russia takes active measures to rebuild these cultural facilities. As of July 2024, in the DPR, LPR, Zaporozhye, and Kherson regions, over 120 cultural facilities were restored, and this effort will go on.
In Ukraine, in mass, they destroy the monument to the soldiers of the Red Army, figures, cultural figures of the Russian Empire and the USSR. The main personal enemy of the Kiev regime is great Russian poet Alexander Pushkin. Only in 2022, about 30 monuments to this poet was demolished. In 2023, they adopted a law on condemnation and banning of propaganda of the Russian Empire policy. You know the full name of it. It was aimed at legalizing the fight with the hundreds titles of the Pushkin streets, and I quote, it was to decrease the influence of Russian narratives. The social networks aptly named it the law on depushkinization. In 2024, in violation of the UNESCO declaration, Odessa demolished the monument to the poet under the management of the Cultural Ministry of Ukraine. The effect of the process to loot and destroy valuables started. For example, in March 2025, the Kiev regime closed access to the caves of the Kiev Monastery of the Caves and started inventory of the relics. We talked about it. They forced open arks with relics and took samples for DNA analysis. Don't they understand what they are doing? Let them look into the document that they signed. The Kiev regime even steal the valuables on the territory of the modern Ukraine and take it abroad under the pretense of saving them. In 2023, the director of Foreign Intelligence Service, Sergei Naryshkin, said that the relics from the Kiev Lavra of the caves are going to be taken out. But the Cultural Minister of Ukraine, Alexander Tkachenko, said that no valuable item is to leave the country. In 2023, a lot of exhibits and icons were taken to Europe. They are exhibited in Louvre among other places. Whether these valuable things are to be returned is still open. But in my opinion, the answer is clear. Kiev is prepared to pay off for the armaments supplied by the West with the cultural heritage. No fakes can cover up the fact. The Banderovich regime has to remember the fakes has a wonderful characteristics. They don't live long. There's a very good quote that is ascribed to either French thinker Denis Diderot or American President Abraham Lincoln. I don't know. Probably it belongs to another author, but I quote, "You can lie to a few for a long time, you can lie to many for a short time, but you cannot keep lying to many endlessly." The ambassador of Ukraine to Norway started to create the panic around the Russian floating nuclear power station Academic Lomonosov. I remind you, it is deployed in the Pavik harbor in Chukotka and is ostensibly, in the opinion of the Ukraine's ambassador, the ecological threat to the Arctic. But who says that? It's the representative of the country who regularly launch strikes against the Zaporozhye NPP. They don't understand that this can lead to a global climate catastrophe. During the briefing for journalists on July the 20th, the Ukrainian so-called diplomat accused Russia that it wants to use it as, I quote, ecological weapons, ignoring international rules and standards in nuclear security and safety and environmental protection. I don't know who this ambassador is, but I would like to ask him a question. Is he aware that the Kiev regime agreed to receive weapons with depleted uranium from Great Britain? It poses threat to the Ukrainian people. What kind of environment we're talking about? He even came to the point of saying that Russia is a terrorist organization who holds the biggest NPP in Europe, the Zaporozhye NPP, hostage. But it is our NPP, and to talk about his statement seriously is futile. There's no sense, especially about the NPP. It is constantly targeted by the Ukrainian army. While talking about the proof, he cited the Norwegian researchers. They're quite positive about the station, noting quite high efficiency and innovative character of the station. He even noted the evaluations of the professor of the Tromsø Arctic University, who underlined the academic Lomonosov is purely civil and provides electricity for 4 regions of the Russian Arctic without necessity to build up on land facilities. This slander can be seen as an advertisement of Russian achievements in peaceful atom. To read more about the Russian breakthrough technologies, you can go to the website of Rosenergoatom. We'll provide you with the links in the text of our briefing. These issues will be covered in the World Atomic Week that's going to take place in Moscow on September 25th through 27th. I think that the best advertisement cannot be invented. One more thing, and this is very serious. According to the information available to us, the Ukraine Special Services would like to use the differences between Russia and Azerbaijan to fuel the hatred on the national grounds. They want to use the people who fled Russia and who are ready for money, commit subversive actions. The idea is to, if these provocations are implemented successfully, they are going to spread information about the Russian aggression. They use all the means available to them to destabilize relations of Russia with its neighboring partners and states. This is the logic of terrorists. As we usually say, that it's the terrorism sponsoring that the West is doing. Now about the situation in Moldova. In the run-up of the parliamentary elections in the country, the authorities continue to fight the competitors, trample upon the norms of the legislation, and to ban media that are not loyal to them. The situation with the polling stations is very indicative. We talked about it a lot. Last week, the Foreign Minister of Moldova proposed to open up in Russia, where a lot of people from Moldova live. As in the last year's presidential elections, only 2 polling stations. At the same time in North America and in West Europe, we talked about it, but we keep receiving the questions. The number of these polling stations are supposed to even go up in Italy from 60 to 73, in Germany from 26 to 36, in France from 20 to 26, in Romania from 16 to 23, in the US from 16 to 22. This shocked people in Moldova. The Moldova's diaspora in Russia was shocked as well. The authorities in Moldova, with their own hands, set up the dividing line between the people of their country. On July 23rd, people from Moldova who live in Russia gave the petition to the Embassy of Moldova with a request to increase the number of polling stations, but it went unresponded. But I'll tell you, we asked questions. Was it Russia who prevented Moldovans to set up polling stations? And time and time again, we underlined that we are prepared to do this, as we do on the request of any other country. We provide the possibility for people to vote. But the Moldovan authorities continue to cleanse the public space from any type of dissent. On July 25th, the Service for Information and Security of Moldova addressed the Central Chamber of Appellation with a request to recognize NGO Eurasia as extremists, but we're not talking about Banderovics who use Nazi symbols or anything like that. They wanted to recognize the NGO Eurasia as extremist. Many know about it. They want to develop cultural and humanitarian ties, preserve historical memory, and maintain dialogue on the Eurasian space. You can see on your own what the organization does. It is aimed, despite disturbances, partnership, cooperation. It is clear that, according to the Moldovan authorities, all of this is extremism. The similar situation is seen with the Russian Center of Science and Culture in Chisinau, that it ostensibly works to undermine statehood and sovereignty of republic. Can a couple of people, of organizations undermine it? We can accuse people of this, but there are no proof. The consequence of this destructive policy is growing internal political differences and anti-governmental sentiment. The government of Moldova set people against each other and fuel this antagonism and hatred between the people. On July 26, Chisinau said a mass meeting and protests of the opposition parties. They promoted national identity and neutrality and balanced foreign policy. At the same time, the meeting in support of Evgenia Gutsul took place. She's under home arrest since April the 9th. The regime wants only one thing. They want to retain power by all means possible, even if it costs the loss of sovereignty and national identity of the country. It has nothing to do with prosperity, stability, security that the pro-Western forces promised to Moldovan people during the previous parliamentary elections 2021, presidential elections 2024. As to the countries who are pressed by anti-elites, here's a new reason to talk about the pseudo-neutrality of Austria. Minister of European and Foreign Affairs of Austria stated during an interview to a German newspaper about an opportunity to talk about joining NATO because of the Russian threats. This republic did not receive neutral status, not from the Austrian Republic, not from Austro-Hungary or Nazi Germany, but the key international legal document of its sovereignty is the state agreement on the restoration of independence and democracy in Austria. It was signed by the USSR, Great Britain, the US, and France on May 15, 1955. The same year, a Moscow Memorandum was signed. It was to preserve the permanent neutrality of the country. Without this fundamental document, the issue of sovereignty of Austria and statehood could have prolonged for an unlimited period of time. A good question. The loss of sovereignty. Does this mean that the country almost de jure lost its sovereignty? Second, the head of the foreign ministry of Austria, while doing such statements, insult people of her country who supports out-of-bloc status. Political leadership of Austria and other European countries disregard the opinion of their people. It's a norm for them. They do it for the sake of for the political situation, to the detriment of the interests of the national economies, social development. We receive a lot of questions regarding the situation around Iran and negotiations on the Iranian nuclear program. We are prepared to answer to them. We see continued attempts of politically biased and destructive forces to destabilize the situation around the Iranian nuclear program under the made-up pretense and to persuade the rest of the world that it poses threats. These advocates of the international peace and security lost the ability to objectively evaluate the situation and to see the correlation between their decisions and the destructive consequences, to learn from their mistakes and not to repeat them. We are seriously concerned about the threats to launch new strikes against nuclear facilities of Iran. I'd like to note that they talk about nuclear weapons. The Islamic Republic of Iran doesn't have it. The IAEA leadership many times confirmed that Tehran is not developing it. In other words, unbiased statements with Iranophobia are presented as the foundation for yet another aggression. The bombings cannot become commonplace in international practice. The catastrophic risks cannot be either ignored or justified. The UN Security Council long ago and unequivocally qualified such attacks as unacceptable. And now some don't like to remember this, or even sometimes ignore them, putting their policy on the first place. Other peacekeepers, the so-called peacekeepers, who justified bombings of nuclear facilities of the Islamic Republic of Iran, who were on the IAEA control, want to start the practical steps to reestablish the sanctions against Iran. They are well aware that real legal and procedural grounds are not there for them. They want to present their ideas as an alternative of an armed escalation and not as an example of good diplomacy that the rest of the world has to accept with humility.
Let me remind you that the UN Security Resolution 2231 indeed provides for a mechanism for returning sanctions, the snapback mechanism. However, for it to be enacted, a significant number of steps and stages should be passed, and they have not been passed. The global community faces this reckless, arbitrary behavior by those who advocate the so-called rules-based order, but for a great deal of time they have been undermining the implementation of the UNSC Resolution 2231, violating its demands and shifting the blame for the stagnation in the JCPOA on Iran. The violators cannot use this discipline mechanism under the resolution, and illegal actions of these countries should not have legitimate consequences for other states. They should not legitimize and they should not become accomplice to the violations of the UNSC resolutions by the Western camp. We firmly believe that amid this fragile truce after the June escalation, we need a drastically new approach. The world has seen what aggressive aspirations and actions lead to under the motto of the ultimate solution to the Iranian question. That is an atrocious wording, but many promoted that. And the hypocritical calls to swiftly restore the full-fledged verification activities by the IAEA in Iran are most vocally done by those who, without a hint of hesitation, did damage to Iran and who put at risk the inspectors and the destruction of inspection activities. They destroyed not only the country, they also destroyed and put at risk peace and security all around the world, including the verification activities of the IAEA. Let us not forget about that. Bearing responsibility for the things they've done is something that they do not want to do. However, facts are there. It's not Iran, but its opponents who attacked the activities of the IAEA in this country, and now they need to ensure confidence that the IAEA could resume its activities, the verification activities, in line with its mandate, sustainable peaceful settlement, and refusing to make new strikes is the fundamental prerequisite for bringing cooperation between Tehran and the IAEA back on track. We believe that at the current point in time, Western opponents should abandon their selfish aspirations and channel their energy not for the destruction but the active search for negotiating decisions, building upon the international law and with due account for legitimate interests of Iran enshrined in the Non-Proliferation Treaty, including the right to enrich uranium for civilian purposes under the IAEA control. There are possibilities to reach such an arrangement, and the Russian side takes active efforts on this track. We closely coordinate our positions with Iranian and Chinese partners. Tehran seeks to have meaningful efforts in this regard, and that is shown by the ongoing dialogue between Tehran and European countries. Another round of negotiations took place on the 25th of July in Istanbul. We hope that London, Paris and Berlin, as well as Washington, realize that there is no point in confrontation and they will focus on genuine diplomatic settlement, guiding by the Non-Proliferation Treaty, acting on the basis of a calibrated balance of interest, advancing reasonable approaches and setting aside the language of blackmail and threats. There have been questions on joining of EU sanctions by Oslo regarding Russian fisheries industry. I would like to comment on that. Unfortunately, in line with its anti-Russian policy, Oslo has joined the anti-Russian EU sanctions on July 10th regarding Russian fishing companies, Northbow, Mormon Seafood. These are companies that are fishing companies, and this decision envisages that their vessels cannot enter the territorial waters and ports of the continental part of Norway. Norway formally is not part of the European Union, but basically it is in line with Brussels when it comes to mounting pressure on Russia, and it is at odds with the common sense and its national interest, and there is nothing new with that. However, this time Oslo had a creative touch to the EU Russophobes. It banned the legitimate activities of Russian fishing vessels regarding fishing stocks that are managed by Russia and Norway. We see flagrant neglect of Norway's commitments within the existing bilateral agreements, including the ones on 1976, as well as direct violation of the decisions by the Joint Russia-Norway Commission on Fisheries. By doing so, the Norwegian authorities put at risk not only the interests of their population, but also the sustainable management of biological resources in the Barents Sea and Norwegian Sea. It is important to note that up until now, despite political differences, there have been annual sessions of Bilateral Fisheries Commission that set a common acceptable catch on major fish. It distributes national quotas and it coordinates measures to regulate and control the catch. They adopt programs for joint research in fisheries. The 50 years of experience shows that it is important to cooperate with Russia, taking into account our interests. When it comes to the pretext that was used by Norwegian authorities for another round of anti-Russian measures, that just shows paranoia. Russian fishing companies allegedly, well, from the point of view of those who explained this to Norwegian authorities, they participate in spy activities. They are sponsored by Russia, and these activities are aimed against critical infrastructure in the maritime areas of Norway. no evidence was provided. These are classical Russophobic scenarios. This decision was followed by the statement by Norwegian leadership that they are ready to continue many years of cooperation with Russia, and this shows that there is no even a trace of pragmatism regarding Norwegian commitment to relations with Russia. And the protest was declared to the Norwegian chargé d'affaires in Russia. He was summoned to the Russian Foreign Ministry on the 29th of July. The Russian side initiated an emergency session of the Bilateral Commission on Fisheries. Overall, we should state that a great deal of damage was done to the win-win cooperation with Norway in fisheries, and these actions will be reciprocated. And there is another outrageous topic. We talked a lot about various points and the cases when the West basically destroys something that used to be its foundation and the core and architecture, the freedom of speech. Without it, as you know, democracy is not possible, especially the Western liberal democracy that completely was associated with independent media. The UK passed an Online Safety Act. I would like to delve on that in particular. I would like to use another word, but let's say to delve on that. On the 25th of July, Britain enacted the 2023 Online Safety Act. While the title is wonderful, who's against security, especially cyber security? But as is a custom in the Anglo-Saxon world, behind this flashy wrapping and lofty words on the need to protect their nationals hides this ugly reality. The British authorities get the tool to have a total control over the activities of the UK, which is becoming even more gloomy. This act obliges social networks, messengers, and platforms to identify the age of users and basically to constantly scan, feed publications, private messages, to identify illegal content, as they put it. That means that the privacy of correspondence not only can be limited following the court ruling, it is eliminated completely. And there is more to that. The points that have some reason to them that should fence off minors from illegal content, but that's the real point of the law behind that. Under the pretext of combating misleading information, fake news, London ensures control over the information space. Let me remind you that London invented the concept of highly likely, and for centuries it has been carrying out false flag provocations, and on a daily basis it generates tons of fakes using tabloids. Are they going to fight against themselves? Well, in this case, to be honest, 90% of the British mainstream press should be shut down because they publish nothing but lies and speculations. Take a look at the way Brits consider their press, and you will see very good statistics. Clearly, we're not talking about any real security. We see a universal tool to limit the freedom of speech and freedom of expression, to fight dissent and their own population. According to their surveys, they do not trust the authorities or the British press. This very British Act was devised in such a way as to cover virtually anything. The British authorities all of a sudden could announce, for instance, the outcome of the Nuremberg trials have an expiry date. It is claimed that they do not have an expiry date, but that is not true. And a person that wants to contest that, or historian association, or let's say a group of veterans that wants to have a discussion on that, they could fall victim of this criminal persecution. London seeks to have a total control, absolute control over the internet, and that is clear. It wants to dominate in this area in a repressive way. It wants to control communications and the information and even thoughts of their nationals. The democratic and liberal principles that they told us about, with great reverence, are being trampled upon completely in the UK. Well, nationals in the UK are outraged. They have these petitions, and there are hundreds of thousands of signatures. One of the petitions has over 400,000 signatures, but there are doubts that it would change anything. Downing Street cares a lot about human rights in other countries. They invest money and attention to this end, and they publicly cover that as well. But once we're talking about human rights in the UK, well, this can wait. And these new points in the British legislation are in line with something else in the Anglo-Saxon world, namely the Australian Online Safety Amendment, social media minimum age. It will come into force in December this year. This model is the same. They use decent pretexts to protect kids, to institutionalize a tool that would allow Canberra to use censorship at their own will to alleviate any kind of dissent. I believe that that is the best occasion to get back to George Orwell and his visionary novel 1984. Let me remind you that the totalitarian state where Big Brother is always watching you was called Oceania, and the prototype was the United Kingdom, as well as countries and territories that were controlled by the UK. Orwell, that was born in occupied India, and his initial name is Eric Arthur Blair, and he knew what he was writing about. The idiom that he coined, thought police and thought crime, perfectly described the campaign unleashed in the West. We've been warning about that for quite some time. We provided facts in the international platforms, and we drew the attention in international fora. We talked about that when Russian media were persecuted. Representatives of various NGOs and civil societies who still dare to be outraged loud and clear. And I would like to recall the timeless words of a German pastor, prisoner of the Dachau camp, Martin Niemöller, although I would like to change them a bit. The bottom line is the same. You will get it. And I am speaking to Western journalists, among other things. Come to think of it, once again, that is the quote of Martin Niemöller, and that is a quote known by a lot of people on our planet, and it was talking about, well, it refers to the developments in Dachau. I changed it to fit the situation with freedom of expression and media. When they persecuted Russian journalists, we were silent. We were not Russian journalists. When they started deleting and blocking Russian media outlets, we were silent. We were not Russian media outlets. When they started inventing the so-called Russian threat, and highly likely, we were silent. We're not Russians. When they came for us, for Western journalists, Western audience on the internet, and Western citizens that use the ICTs, nobody was there to defend us. This quote of Niemöller fits perfectly the occasion. if we change it, indeed, everything perpetrated by the West regarding Russian journalists and Russian media outlets will be used by them regarding their journalists and their media, but there will be nobody to help them in their territories. And another anti-Russian paper. On the 23rd of July, the Bulgarian parliament adopted a declaration along with traditional standard tropes about Russian aggression. It expresses solidarity with the European Parliament, describing Russia as, come to think of it, a state sponsor of terrorism. Legislators of a number of European states made such statements a couple of years ago, and now Bulgarian members of parliament try to catch on this train of European Russophobia, although they're quite late, and they labeled Russia as the sponsor of terrorism. We're talking about the very Western representatives who invest money and weapons to the Kiev regime, and it doesn't hide that it is carrying out terrorist activities that are subversive activities against civilians. It is intimidating, but at the same time, the West does not see that it sponsors terrorism. We don't see any link with reality, and such loud and ungrounded accusations against our countries have the task of setting the ground for new sanctions. I will leave it to the authors of this quasi-document. They do not have any conscience, and everybody sees for themselves that any aggressive lawlessness against our state and our citizens will have the response. Bulgarian parliamentarians should understand that and should carefully calibrate what they say. And it is important that common sense prevailed, and less than half voted for this document.
We had a lot of questions about the verdict of the International UN Court. On July 23rd, the International UN Court pronounced a verdict on the request of the UNGA. This case involved the record high number of states. The Russian Federation actively participates in the climate process and participated in the work of the court. The court reviewed the issues on the reviewed certain international legal commitment in a fight with climate change and the character of legal consequences resulting from these their violations. The court ruled that the states are obliged to take measures to prevent and to mitigate consequences of the climate change based on the international law, including provisions of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, Paris Agreements, and common law. The court attempts to answer the issues of correlations of the norms of the climate law and the human rights. This verdict does not have legal force, obligatory legal force. However, it will influence the future of the international law in climate. The influence of this verdict on further development of the international law is yet to be seen. The reaction of the Russian Federation will be shaped after the comprehensive analysis of all its provisions with the involvement of representatives of other agencies. We'll return to this issue many times now about the debates in the UNGA on the responsibility to protect. I don't really understand what this is. It sounds even strange. I'll remind you, on June 25th and July the 1st, the UNGA held annual debates on the UN General Secretary report on responsibility to protect, dedicated to the 20th anniversary of this doctrine. Supporters of the concept praised it and said that humanitarian catastrophes of the modern times ostensibly could have been prevented based on the concept and through the International Criminal Court, and I quote, as an important tool of fighting impunity. But we know that there was a lot of impunity within this court. Many founders of the court were terrified because of it. The UNGA shouldn't celebrate the anniversary of this controversial concept. It is seen by countries from the group of friends to protect the UN Charter and other states of the Global South as an attempt to implement humanitarian intervention. Under the motto of these NATO forces bombed former Yugoslavia. It is also seen as yet another mechanism to interfere in internal affairs of sovereign state. First of all, to remove unwanted governments. The supporters of this concept don't like to remember that one of the reasons why it was received so badly was the military operation of NATO in Libya. During this, the UN Security Council Resolution 1973 mandate was distorted, and the countries of the alliance went, to put it mildly, far beyond the protection of civilians and de facto military help to one of the sides of the armed conflict. They don't like to remember about it, but the discussion should be based around these facts. Russia, during the debates on July the 1st, the speech is available on the website of the Permanent Mission of Russia to the UN, yet again outlined the ideas about the biasness of the concept by the West, and as it shows the additional value of such debates is non-existent, and shows the stark contrast between the views of the various countries. We don't support the further activities of the Special Advisor to the UN General Secretary on responsibility to protect. We also have good questions. The Budapest saw the competition in freestyle wrestling. This competition is a vivid example that sports can be out of politics, and great states will try and find mutually acceptable solutions to the existing problems, including from the sports diplomacy. Given the escalation of relations between Russia and the West that started an unprecedented campaign to internationally isolate our country, Hungary is essentially the only EU country who protects their national interests, including sovereign position in dialogue with Moscow. We believe that the true role of sports is, as the 20th century told us in the doctrine documents, to unite nations and people and to decrease tensions in the international affairs, to give a pause that is always much needed. The sporting events should be open for everyone without exception, regardless of citizenship, race, ethnicity, sex, and political beliefs. It is clear, but sometimes we have to prove this simple idea once again. In Moscow and St. Petersburg on July 24th, the Forum of Finalists of Gromyko competition of young CIS international affairs specialists was completed. This competition takes place annually since 2018 and over the 7 years has brought together more than 3,000 of young researchers from 11 countries. It is aimed at making popular research of international affairs, modern history of diplomacy, integration processes, and the Eurasian space, as well as expanding dialogue between young specialists, researchers, and diplomats. This year, organizers received record high number of applications, 230 applications from 10 CIS countries. They had interest works with the original outlook on the Eurasian integration, the development of the Union state, changes in the world economy, protection and preservation of the historical memory. Following the first stage, the expert jury selected 50 participants. The winners included representatives from Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. The awarding ceremony took place at Gimor University on July 25th. They also visited Foreign Ministry. We congratulate the finalists and winners. We wish them success in their scientific endeavors. We will use the results of their work in our practical activities. In Manjurok, the Altai Republic, on July 24th through 26th, under the presidency of Mikhail Mishustin, International Ecological Conference took place. It was participated by delegations of high level from 8 countries. The key event of the conference was the plenary session, the environmental challenges on the way to the sustainable development. Prime ministers of the participating countries talked about the activities of their countries on the environmental tracks. Special expert sessions were dedicated to the issues of influence of climate change, to water resources, ecotourism regulation, operation of transborder reserves and national parks. The idea about necessity to coordinate efforts of the international community in this sphere was repeated many times. Russia actively deals with the environmental issues, including within the bilateral, multilateral formats. We're sure that this expert dialogue will contribute significantly to further strengthening the relevant work in this sphere of the first direct flight between the capitals of Russia and North Korea took place. It was operated by the Northwind Airlines. The plane had, among other passengers, the Russian president of the Intergovernmental Commission on Trade and Economic and Scientific and Technical Cooperation between Russia and North Korea, and Minister of Natural Resources and Ecology of the Russian Federation. We are sure that the direct flights between the capitals of the 2 countries will help expanding Russia-North Korea cooperation in various spheres, including exchanges in practical sphere and humanitarian exchanges. I would like to draw attention to the fact that on July 25th, 28th, the international program of international program organized by the Gorchakov Foundation for Public Diplomacy started over the time that this project has existed, Russia was visited by 100 people from 50 countries. For example, in 2024, it was participated by specialists from Argentina, Brazil, Costa Rica, Mexico, Salvador, and Chile. This year, it will bring together specialists in energy from Brazil, Colombia, Salvador, Chile, and Ecuador. One of the organizers is the TV BRICS International Media Corporation. The participants will discuss international energy security, achievements of Russian oil and gas sector, and prospects of development cooperation between Russia and Latin America in energy. The program includes practical workshops, visits to energy facilities, and lectures and roundtables discussing peculiarities and risks of emergence of new energy markets, principles of the organization of hybrid energy, role of Russian oil and gas sector, and others. August the 1st will mark the declaration of independence of the Republic of Benin. The diplomatic relations with this country were established on June 4th, 1962. Our relations are friendly and time-tested. We maintain regular political dialogue and contacts. We reconfirm contacts and ties. The delegation of the Republic of Benin, led by the foreign minister, participated in the first Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg on July 27th, 28th, 2023, on November the 8th, 2024, on the sidelines of the first ministerial conference of Russia-Africa Partnership. Sergei Lavrov met with his counterpart. The interparliamentarian contacts are developing gradually. The President of National Assembly of the Republic of Benin participated in the second National Parliamentary Conference Russia-Africa. And on September 20th, 2024, the State Duma established a group on ties with parliamentaries from a number of African countries, including Benin. On February 21st through 23rd, 2023, Benin was visited by the State Duma delegation headed by the coordinator of the group of interparliamentary cooperation with the countries of Central and South Africa, Nikolai Novichkov. There's great potential of developing bilateral relations in various spheres. We see the development of cooperation in education. Soviet and Russian universities educated more than 2,500 people from Benin. The number of scholarship goes up. In the academic year 2024-2025, saw 150 scholarships compared to 110 scholarships in 2023-2024. We see the growth. We are prepared to continue the multidimensional cooperation for the benefit of our peoples and countries. We wish the people in the Republic of Benin peace and prosperity. On August the 3rd, the Republic Nigeria will celebrate the 65th anniversary of their independence. We hope that Russian mission will start its activities until the end of this year. Between our countries maintain political dialogue. In March 2024, there was a telephone call between the President of Russia and President of Nigeria in January 2024. Moscow was visited by Prime Minister, Minister of Economy and Finance of Nigeria. And in November 2024, the Niamey was visited by the chair of the government of the Russian Federation, Alexander Novak, in November 2024, Minister of Foreign Affairs Cooperation and Nigeria's abroad, participated in the ministerial conference of the Russia-Africa Partnership in Sochi, where he met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. In April 2025, Moscow, within the first consultation, Russia Confederation of Sahel States, Lavrov and his counterpart held a separate meeting on bilateral agenda. There's work on the establishment of the Intergovernmental Commission on Trade and Economic, Scientific and Technical Cooperation. On July 28th, Minister of Energy of Russia visited Niamey, where he held negotiations with top leadership of the Republic, where set for further building up cooperation with this country. Would like to congratulate the people of the country on this holiday. On August the 6th marks the national holiday of the multinational state of Bolivia, the 200th anniversary of its independence. Bolivia is a key and priority partner of Russia in Latin America and the Caribbean. Our countries has traditionally friendly relations. They were time-tested. We are united in building a more just and democratic world order. We protect norms and international law, including protection of sovereignty and non-interference into internal affairs of state, common approaches and key issues of global agenda in terms of the building up of a multipolar world order. Our relations are developing in the spirit of true strategic partnership, resistant to the influence from the outside. We have regular political contacts at highest levels. In the run-up to this holiday, we would like to wish our friends in Bolivia peace, prosperity, and all the best.
I'm ready to take your questions. International Life. Are you here with us? Hello, Madam Zakharova. I have the following question. What's your take on the statement of the head of the European diplomacy, Kaja Kallas? She made a statement several days ago during the session of the EU Council on Foreign Affairs, and she stated that Belize had to pay for abandoning democracy. It begs the question, does the EU's intention to criticize similar laws still exist? Does it mean that the EU wants to criticize its member states? You know, there are some statements that shouldn't be made by anyone, no matter who makes them. There are some things that are not acceptable, but it is especially peculiar to know who exactly said it. I don't quite understand why the EU starts to dictate its will to non-members, and why is it done by Kaja Kallas? In no way has she shown her constructive attitude towards anything. She is just a member of a certain dynasty. Clearly, it was supported by certain powers, and that is just outrageous. You know, the EU has been behaving in such a way when we're talking about this relapse of democracy in Georgia or abandoning of democracy in Georgia, and this is quite telling. It should be a graphic example and a lesson for other countries who seek to join the EU, who believe what they say, and who believe every word regarding their future membership, who build close contacts with the EU. That's the way you will be treated by someone and for no particular reason. For some reason, they believe that they are entitled to have this humiliating attitude to a state, to people who have a really interesting and long history. And the times when EU candidates had their interests taken into account, these times are a thing of the past, and I don't think that the situation will change. Over the past 20 years of the previous rounds of enlargement, the EU has since changed. Back in the day, it was an economic union. It was about benefit, mutual respect, some universal principles. Right now, it's just an economic division of NATO with a command system, chain of command, and totalitarianism. At the helm are not the leaders that are guided by the national interests and that understand the need to respect the interests of others. At the helm are liberals and globalists, and namely, they are represented by Ursula von der Leyen and Kaja Kallas. The key basic condition to advance on this European path is to completely abandon national interests, national sovereignty, and national decency. If that's the way you can talk to someone that is not under your supervision, that is not covered by your mandate, if you can talk to them in such a way, once they join this backline discipline and this chain of command, nobody would even talk to them, and their opinion would not be taken into account at all. They will just be sent some ready-made decisions, the decisions that were adopted in the morning, and in the evening they could learn about that from the news. So given, well, if we're talking about the respect for traditions, norms, forget about that. And that is what's happening right now. It's not simply interference into domestic affairs. That is a flagrant, blatant neocolonialism at the new technological level. This desire to have manual governance of member states, non-member states, manually. They want to govern everyone, to rule everyone. At the same time, the Brussels hypocrisy is off the limits. The EU has not been the beacon of democracy for a long time. We see the cleansing of media landscape, and that was the cornerstone for their democracy. We see fighting against any opposition, using control over the civil society, ignoring of mass-scale human rights violations. That is the track record that they have, but that's not the kind of a track record that gives them the right to lecture others. Listen, Kaja Kallas says that Georgia is sliding away from democracy. I don't want to have this journey into history, but as far as I remember, she's from Estonia. Estonia has always been within the British sphere of influence. The UK has enacted this online act to have an absolute control. Why can't we speak about this backsliding of democracy in the UK? You know that the UK Prime Minister Liz Truss had this cask, and let her lecture Kaja Kallas and London of the way they shouldn't slide away from democracy. But for some reason, they do not want to do that. Maybe that's because the UK went away from the European Union, yet they have these negotiations. And we need to take into account the many years of membership of the UK in the EU, and maybe they have more rights to talk with Brits in such a manner rather than speaking in such a manner with non-EU members. Brussels and those who stand behind it care about not democratic norms and how countries do not fit them. The bone of contention for the EU is that countries do not want to blindly follow their instructions. That's what they're not happy about. The regimes of Zelensky and Sandu follow Brussels textbooks, and they get away with murder. They are sponsored, and those who are ready to defend their national interests and take their responsibility for the fate of their peoples, whether we're talking about EU members or not, well, the Eurocrats want to punish them publicly using sanctions, using accusations and humiliating statements. Nothing scares them. They have no qualms about any means. They do it point blank, and they even resort to outright blackmail, including with regards to rank-and-file citizens. They are threatened with a visa regime, despite the EU legislation. Thank you for your answer. And another question on the recent statement by US President Donald Trump. He said that if Iran resumes its nuclear program, the US would swiftly destroy it, and, a quote, "we will do it openly and with pleasure." That's what Donald Trump said. What's your take on that? What is a quote on? Yeah, that's a statement on the Iranian nuclear program. "We will do it openly and with pleasure." The Russian side strongly condemns any calls to make military strikes to alleviate misunderstandings and contradictions regarding the peaceful nuclear program in Iran. Our position has been consistent here. We have repeatedly warned everybody regarding the detrimental military reckless campaigns. They pose threat to stability and security in the Middle East. We cannot allow for the military strikes on nuclear facilities that are safeguarded by the IAEA to be commonplace in the international practice. And the attack on such facilities are fraught with disastrous risks, and they should not be ignored. I've already mentioned that. I believe that I've already answered this question in detail in my introductory remarks. Thank you so much. Let's move on. TASS News Agency, are you here with us? Hello, Madam Zakharova. We're here with you. We have one question. What's your comment on the statement by Serbian Minister Starovic in the interview with Western media that Belgrade is ready to join anti-Russian sanctions once Serbia joins the European Union? You know, this interview came as a shock for Serbians, per se. Their leadership told them one thing. They confirmed their position on the international arena, but it turned out that the minister of the federal government said a completely different thing, and he said it loud and clear. Indeed, on the 25th of July, an interview was published with the Minister on Euro integration of Serbia, Nemanja Starovic, with the Austrian agency APA, and there was and he said that Belgrade was ready to join EU sanctions against Russia, and they are ready to do that once the European future of the country is sealed. And they even make specific timeline, a few months before Serbia joins the EU. Well, what can I say here? I believe that those who assume responsibility for the fate of their people and those who to whom the people entrusted their future should respect their citizens. And if the Serbian citizens vote in favor of a respectable attitude and win-win cooperation with Russia, they vote for preserving our unity, our culture, for developing ties on various tracks, for non-imposing of sanctions, then the Serbian leadership should respect this position and they should not deceive their citizens. These assessments were already commented by the Serbian president, and he said that these statements by Storovic are not careful enough. The Serbian leader said that Belgrade will not change their principal stance on preserving partnership with Russia and not joining sanctions against our country. Previously, some similar statements were made by the chair of the Serbian government. I would not even like to guess what prompted the government of the Serbian government to make such deliberations and to voice this idea that Belgrade could join anti-Russian sanctions campaign that is illegitimate and that was launched by the West, especially since this statement was denounced. I'll let them deal with that between themselves and let them take stock of steps, future steps, or steps that they prepare, should they do that. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Ria Novosti are here with us. Hello, Madam Zakharova. We would like to ask you to comment on the ongoing pressure on Russian journalists in Germany. Unfortunately, it is still going on. Thank you. Well, the trend is obvious here. We see that German authorities opted to squeeze Russian media out of the country. There is no doubt that we're not talking about specific claims to specific journalists. There's no doubt that this ever happened. That is a deliberate desire to purge the information space, to use various means to this end in order to expel Russian journalists using various pretexts to purge the information space from unfavored media that are popular, that are enjoying high credibility in media space. Berlin is using repressions at the level of the EU. It joins all possible sanctions as well as in national capacity. It oppresses Russian journalists. They're being expelled from Germany using various absurd pretexts. They are denied visa for many years. They do not provide any comments to this end. And another case in point is when German police went to the flat of a Russian journalist and they seized passports of this journalist and his family. That is the darkest pages in the German history reincarnated. You can get more detailed information on this in the special section of the Russian Foreign Ministry website. We'll publish the link. We say with responsibility that we will respond to any case of oppression against Russian journalists, and we will take symmetric, asymmetric, various measures regarding German journalists that are working in our country, that enjoy every opportunity as journalists. And if Germany opted for such an approach, we will respond. Thank you for your question. Thank you. Izvestia, are you here with us? Hello, Madam Zakharova. I have one question. Previously, Azerbaijani media started circulating information that they need to bolster cooperation with NATO. What's your take on this situation? Thank you. NATO in general as a bloc and its individual member states for many years have been trying to cling to South Caucasus or to strengthen their positions there. The goal is obvious, and we have repeatedly mentioned that, is to use the capabilities and the resource of the regional states to benefit the collective West, especially when it comes to geopolitical standoff with our country. So there's a comprehensive point here. They do not separate things. They don't need any cooperation on an equal footing on the post-Soviet space. They want to seize resources, to set countries against one another, and to fuel tension, to behave as standard, typical colonizers and imperialists. We do hope that the countries of the region, including Azerbaijan and Armenia, realize the risks of fueling tensions and the risks of deepening interaction with NATO. Indeed, the situation is being aggravated, and everybody knows how it might end up. Everywhere where NATO appears, confrontation is fueled, just like military tension. They forget such words as peace, stability, normality. Instead of that, the new normality, the new normal comes into play, and this is something that is imposed by the West. RBC, are you here with us? Hello. Madam Zakharova, what's your take on arrangements between the US and the EU on trade deal? Namely, in accordance with this deal, the EU shall purchase energy for 750 billion USD, and basically that's the way they will get rid of dependence from Russian energy sources. Are you talking about this deal that they published? Yeah, this tariffs arrangement and other bilateral trade arrangements. This is something that was published just several days ago. Officially, this text was not published, but we have seen the statements by the European Commission leadership on the key elements of the deal and the pledge to the American side to abstain from introducing 30% tariffs for European products and to set it at a level of 15%. Brussels agreed to spend 750 billion USD to procure a number of strategic goods from the US, LNG, oil, nuclear fuel, chips, and the pledge to invest additional 600 billion USD to the American economy. We're talking about stagnating EU, as well as to pursue a policy to confront using by third countries of excessive capacities on the production of steel, aluminium, and copper. In principle, the text has not been published, but these ideas were voiced openly.
You know, it's a word vassal says to their sovereign. This is Western European terrible and the worst meaning, the middle-aged approaches. This is the dark pages of their history with fires and witch hunting, abandonment of common sense and the ability to think and to ask questions. I have a feeling that all of this was declared by Ursula von der Leyen. Regardless of when and how, if ever, these agreements are to be put on paper, they give us an understanding what place they are going to have in the world economy and international arena. What's this place for the EU in general and its member states? Whether the EU gave itself this place or somebody else showed it, we'll see in future. But the bureaucrats in Europe abuse common sense in the EU. They do everything they can so that the united resources of the member states of the EU serve not the people within the EU, but the globalist elites or the countries that the European Commission wants to please. This is a procedure. They literally can undress fully and leave the last thing they have, and even those they are going to get in future. The EU, the European Commission, humiliate themselves before the big brother with the acquiescence of the people in the EU, who, in my opinion, because the media don't give the opportunity for people to understand what is going on, all these elites, globalist elites, the EU wants to turn into a militarized colony of the US with centralized procurement of American armaments and natural resources, with a directive economy providing for voluntarily transfer of capital to the metropolis overseas. The European business will have no alternative but to procure energy from the US at the higher prices and to put capitals abroad. Just what has been done. The EU, NATO, Brussels bureaucracy, ruled by people like Ursula von der Leyen, they gave the management of the EU countries to other states and other elites. The commitment of Ursula von der Leyen to procure American energy sources follows up on the European Commission's policy to undermine economic sovereignty of the EU member states. It will lead to more dependence from the US. The interests of ordinary Europeans is not taken into account. An example is unilateral restrictions and other measures against Russia. The negative consequences will be felt by many generations of taxpayers in the EU. The EU already is paying for political ambitions of the head of the European Commission. Despite object economic indicators, it continues to position EU together with China's US as a major economy in the world without any grounds for this. In reality, GDP and parity of buying ability of the EU and US are not among not in the top of this story. I'm not sure how your media outlet sees that. It's probably should be put into another section from the economic section. If you have no questions, then is Sinhua with us? Madam Zakharova, I have the following question. Last Tuesday, representatives of Iran, Russia and China held a trilateral meeting on the Iranian nuclear problem. What are the expectations about the prospects of the peaceful settlement of this issue? What do you think about the interaction with China in this regard? We gave a detailed commentary in the first part of the briefing on July 22nd. Tehran saw the trilateral meeting of the representatives of Russia, Iran and China on the Iranian nuclear program. They discussed the status of negotiations of the nuclear problems. The Russian delegation was headed by the director of the Department on Non-Proliferation and Arms Control, Oleg Postnikov. The meeting showed high-level coordination with our partners. We are sure that this issue can be settled only through political and diplomatic measures. We deem it unacceptable to renew sanctions against Iran. We want to interact with China at the international platforms to prevent the use of this issue to put political pressure on Iran. Thanks to you. Is Reuters with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. I'm right here. I'd like you to comment on the ultimatum of President Trump against Russia. That they will introduce secondary sanctions against Russia. I'd like to ask you, did you have any preliminary consultations about this? Did Washington communicate this to Moscow? How can this influence the normalization between Russia and the US? You have several questions. The administration of the president responded to this. Our country heard the statements from Washington. As to the secondary sanctions, we comment on it every day in great detail. During the press conference following the ministerial meeting of FCO, Sergei Lavrov gave commentary on this on July 15th as to any kind of sanctions. We talk about it during every briefing. We and our international partners face an unprecedented level of sanctions. The threats to introduce new restrictions is commonplace. Of course, we will respond to this. We discuss them in various contexts and formats. But it is clear that that's what the Western countries do. We cannot disregard this fact given the world's economy, but we know how to oppose sanctions. We worked out tools and schemes that help meet the needs of our markets and suppliers. We enter new markets, create our own production. The West is stalling. They don't have any other options what to do. At the same time, we respond to this and take measures to oppose all this, or even to use for our benefit, and so on. They attack world economy. It's clear, and these sanctions undermine the well-being of whole regions of the world. It is clear as well. It is strange that not everyone understands that. Also, you asked whether the American side communicated this to us. I don't have information about it. Madam Zakharova, how this kind of threats can influence normalization of relations between the countries? Can you please repeat how these threats from President Trump can influence? No threats coming from anyone can influence positively the normalization. This is a theoretical answer to your practical question. Theoretical because it's the law of it's natural law. How threats can positively influence normalization. Threats can be abandoned for normalization. If that's it, thanks to you. Is the China Media Corporation with us? But we don't have questions for you. Thank you for this gift. Is Bold News with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Thank you for the opportunity to ask the question. The Russian citizen Konstantin Nikulin is in the Lithuanian prison. He was sentenced to a life sentence and accused in committing a crime on the border Medininkai on July 31st, 1991. The customs employees were attacked. Are there any prospects to use to liberate him? We commented on this topic during the briefing on March the 6th. He was illegally sentenced in Lithuania. There were a lot of violations of the procedures. No real proof that he was guilty did not exist. This issue is on the control of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, our embassy in Lithuania. The relevant agencies requested to transfer him to a Russian prison, but the Lithuanian side refused. Unfortunately, there's no positive developments in this case. We will continue to provide all the necessary facilitation. Is Lenta.ru with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have one question for you. On July the 20th, and far from Paris, an agreement on the future status of New Caledonia was signed. It says that this French overseas territory will have extended rights of autonomy and is declared a state as part of the French Republic. What can you say about this agreement? They are to be enshrined in the French Constitution. Over the last year, we talked about it. We took the worse political and public situation in New Caledonia. We received questions. The front cares about other countries. They comment on the human rights and freedoms in all parts of the world. The zone of responsibility that France said they had. The agreement on the future status of New Caledonia is a response of Metropolia to a deepening crisis on the archipelago. I think that you remember that in spring 2024, New Caledonia saw mass protests caused colonial and failed policy of the French authorities in regard to this territory. The last straw was the attempts of France Paris to impose reform of the local legislation, violating the rights of the people there. Activists promoted independence of New Caledonia, and French was unable to deal with it. We said many times that this alarming situation in New Caledonia is a result of decolonization that was not finalized. The UN Special Committee on Decolonization sees New Caledonia as non-self-governing territory, and every year passes a resolution confirming the right of the locals for self-determination. The French refuses to settle the issue. They disregard the international law and their commitments at the UN. This is how Paris truly sees the international law. The agreement on the future status of New Caledonia is an important compromise that gives more autonomy to the archipelago and expands the rights of its people. It is too early to give such evaluations to this agreement. As far as we know, a number of the authoritative political forces of New Caledonia seriously opposed this document. In case it is endorsed, we'll see how it's going to be implemented. We think that it is a trap, and that Paris attempts to preserve the control of the archipelago at the expense of the reform of the local legislation, to use its electoral landscape, leaving the locals in a minority. Yet again, it's an issue. Time will show. Let us not jump to conclusions. In reality, Paris wants to ensure the legal rights and interests of the locals in New Caledonia.
Thank you. News.ru, are you here with us? Hello, Madam Zakharova. News.ru, Mikhail Rosen. We have two questions, if I may. The first was covered partially. Europe agrees to accept most humiliating demands by the US president to the detriment of its interests, for instance, not to buy Russian oil. Has it lost its sovereignty, and does it make any sense to talk with Europe if everything is decided in Washington? Actually, that is something that the Russian foreign minister has been talking about repeatedly. The problem of modern Western Europe is that it has lost its sovereignty. It's not just a figure of speech, it's just what actually happens, and that is the problem of Western Europe. That is the problem that the citizens of Western Europe should address together with their governments and legal representatives. They should understand what it would lead to. Under the guise of strengthening integration, it turned into this chain of command, and then the main economic driver was lost for the freedom of economy, and then it was subdued to some collective endeavors. I'm talking about the fact that all countries were united and they were subdued to Brussels democracy, although it is not a democracy, it has never been, it's just an atrocious bureaucracy. And as for Washington and its globalist elites, they try to rule things, and they try to preserve this policy to get their benefit, to have this neo-colonial guidelines to destroy national identity of countries and peoples, to abandon traditional values, and so on. We get an impression that we are witnessing not just a crisis, but a final act of this tragical farce called the European sovereignty. What happens today between Washington and its Atlantic satellites exceeds the gloomiest forecasts on the future of Europe. European capitals were once proud about their independent foreign policy and the role of one of the centers of power, their economy, and now they compete in implementing the most absurd, suicidal indications and instructions from the other side of the ocean. We're not talking about union solidarity, we're talking about dependence of vessels. The sanctions hysteria disrupted economic ties, and it had dealt a blow to the prosperity of millions of Europeans, and that is a graphic example of this self-destruction. And the genuine tragedy is that the ruling elites in the EU deliberately sacrifice the interests of their citizens to the interests of American mentors. The energy crisis was artificially caused by the refusal to purchase Russian affordable energy and the terrorist attack in Nord Stream 1 and 2. This is a direct cost for loyalty to Washington. And once again, there are some contradictory statements made from Washington by Western elites that were set up in Brussels, and they occupy various positions. The European taxpayers finance their own their own deficit, and they sponsor the murders of citizens of Ukraine at the guise of protecting Ukrainian people. When we talk about human rights, well, they talk about human rights, but they destroy this notion completely, and they stroke it out of their priority list, since they turn a blind eye to the crimes that are committed and that are sponsored by the West. And this political dependence has its cost. The economic crisis, you see that some European countries are facing stagnation, looming stagnation. I believe that Europe has deprived itself for a long time of competitive edge. They deliberately gave their markets to American competitors without even fighting, as if they wanted to do that. That is the kind of Europe that gave birth to free economic relations, especially interstate ties and so on. I'm talking about the fact that the EU was devised as an economically beneficial union that yielded benefits by minimizing costs. And now it turned out that the Western Europe tries to get rid of its economy, rewriting key industrial companies to other American companies. Whether Europe is finally deprived of its sovereignty, well, the Europeans, the historians should decide for themselves, but currently sovereignty is not existent in Europe. That is a fait accompli. By the way, if we're talking about energy, economy, and all these decisions that made not in Berlin, Paris, in Brussels, they're not taken at the national level. They're not delegated to Brussels as a national will that is united by some European Union will and concept. No, it is shaped in other places. Washington, globalist elites do that, and European leaders turned not into political or economic managers. I don't want even to call them puppets, because puppets make some steps following the desire or will of somebody else, but here we see this complete imbalance. They have turned into something that is self-humiliating and self-destructing terminators. Their task is to fulfill and to implement somebody else's instructions and covering it behind the rhetorics of unity of transatlantic community. Thanks a lot, and I have the second question, if I may. We get atrocious news from the Gaza Strip. According to the UN, famine is going on there. How can we put an end to this humanitarian plight? And on the other hand, how can we prevent the new escalation? We share the UN assessment and the assessment by humanitarian entities and the majority of the international community. The humanitarian situation has aggravated to the limit. It is a disaster. We have repeatedly highlighted the need to provide assistance to all those who need it in line with the universal humanitarian principles. I can confirm that our consistent and principled position on the need to ensure sustainable and long-term solution to the Palestinian issue and to prevent the relapse of violence and human suffering, and this position has not changed. I would like to draw your attention to the international conference, high-level conference in New York in the UN on two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It is attended by Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Vershinin, and the implementation of the two-state solution, the establishment of the Palestinian state that would exist in peace and security with Israel, given all the provisions that we mention all the time, is something that could be the way out of this dramatic situation. I can also draw your attention to the statement by Mr. Vershinin, and I can also say that following this conference we'll share more detailed assessment of this event. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Newsfront. Hello, if I may, I have three questions. The first one has to do with gas supplies to Ukraine via Bulgaria. Reportedly, Ukraine will start importing Azerbaijani gas using the Trans-Balkan corridor. That is the new direction using the territory of Bulgaria and Romania. It was reported by head of the Ukrainian Naftgaz, Koretsky. What's Russia's take on such an interaction between Azerbaijan and the Kiev regime, and what is behind such bolstering of relations between Azerbaijan and Ukraine? You know, I've already commented today the topic that is similar to that, and I would like to say that Russian position regarding the actions of the Nazi regime in Kiev has repeatedly been outlined to the Azerbaijani side, and it is well known to everyone. If I may, I have a follow-up question that is not quite pleasant. President of Azerbaijan Ilham Aliyev received the Ukrainian army chevron from the Ukrainian journalist, and he said, keep up with your job, and according to some sources it had Nazi insignia, and these words by the Azerbaijani leader, do they justify? Well, I have just answered this question. Have you asked this question to the Azerbaijani side? Have you got their comment? Do you have a picture of chevron? Could you please send it to me? I would study this picture. We believe that the Kiev regime is a terrorist regime. We provide facts on a daily basis. We brief all our allies, partners, countries with which we have dialogue on this topic, on other issues, building upon facts. It's not that we simply outline our assessment, but on a daily basis, regularly, we provide this data to them so that we could corroborate our approach, but also in order to show the danger that lies behind this interaction with the Kiev regime, because it poses a risk to the whole world, and such things as neo-Nazism cannot be good just from one side. They are 100% rotten to the core. They represent an ideology of extremism, and in their form, in their essence, they have mutated and they have become completely terrorist. That is the position that we outlined to Baku, and Baku knows about it perfectly. Having said that, let me remind you that I would like to anticipate your question, and I said that the so-called representatives of the Ukrainian media landscape, they claim to be journalists, but actually they're some kind of mercenaries, or they were employed by Western security services. They will use provocations, they will use other pretexts. With the help of the Kiev regime and Kiev entities, they will do all kinds of nasty things to sow chaos on the post-Soviet space. They need resources. The West needs resources. They need gas, oil. They need to have this all kinds of Mendeleev table, rare earth metals, given their aspirations in the artificial intelligence. And we provided the data in the article in the Russian newspaper Rossiyskaya Gazeta. How can they get that? They will use all possible means, including the Kiev regime. They will use it to have provocations in the post-Soviet space to get their hands on the resources. Recently, there have been hearings in the Congress or in the Senate in the US. And a future ambassador of the US to Kazakhstan addressed to the parliament, and just listen what she said. We'll definitely mention this quote completely in the briefing. We'll just put it in brackets, but if we just have a recap, she said that her mission is to squeeze Chinese companies from the Kazakhstan market of rare earth metals. What kind of diplomacy is that? That is the kind of attitude towards countries, including in the post-Soviet space, as promising colonies. That is the complete neglect to the international law, the United Nations Charter, the Vienna Conventions on Diplomatic and Consular Relations. That is the declaration of an outright robbery. And to this end, they will use all possible means. They need resources. Having this level of digitalization, logistics, economy, artificial intelligence, and shaping the world in this new style, the West, the US, and the whole international community claim that and introduce that. But to this end, they need resources. And it's best to have it free of charge. And it's even better if they do not pay for the delivery. And something that is even more important for them, as was claimed 90 years ago, the countries and peoples that would provide these resources free of charge to them, to process it free of charge as well. That is the struggle for resources, for natural resources. Previously, it was believed that new technologies would ensure less dependence on resources, and lower consumption of natural resources, everything is becoming more technological, and we would use less resources. But it turned out to be completely different, and the demand for such resources is skyrocketing. You see, that's the point behind all this. And the faster everyone understands all that is a struggle for resources, the better it would be. The faster everybody understands that the painful times for the West are coming, given their neo-colonial attitude and this technological drive, the more there are chances to prevent this disaster, technological disaster. Thank you. If I may, I have a second question. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said at the territory of census that for the first time in history, Russia is waging a war against the West all by itself, and we should not be weak. I would like to correct you. He said that we have allies, Belarus, the DPRK. Not only did he list them, but he paid tribute to their contribution in our common struggle. You should provide the complete quote. Okay, got it. The Military Watch reported that Germany wants to procure U.S. Typhoon missiles capable of launching cruise missiles. They can strike Russian capital, and Russia is considered as the main target. Given the warnings of the president of Russia when we're talking about Taurus missiles, will Russia consider Germany as a legitimate target in case such missiles are used by the Ukrainian armed forces? God forbid they do that. If it is well known in advance that they will be procured by Germany. You shouldn't shape and formulate this question in such a detail. You should get back to the quote that you mentioned, the quote by President Putin. He said, only German officers will be able to operate Taurus missiles. What would that mean? That means that German soldiers would use missiles to strike Russian territory. That is nothing but dragging Germany into a direct military conflict with the Russian Federation. There is no other way of describing it. That's what President Putin of Russia said. And that is the answer to your question. And after that, it's up to the military to decide how it will be called specifically. However, the president described it in a crystal clear way.
Thank you. And question 3. Russian leadership many times underlined that Russia won't be talked on the language of ultimatums. In your opinion, the language of diplomacy in the Western civilization died, or Russia and the West speaks different languages of diplomacy? What's the difference? This is to follow up on the recent ultimatums. We'll have to talk for 3 hours about it, because the West is not homogeneous, because NATO states pursue various policies. Some of them use not even ultimatums, but aggressive attacks through words. They use labels and insults. This is not what reflects their activities. It means that they cannot do nothing but only to say things to the microphone. They don't see anything. I mean, the regimes in the Baltic states, first of all, they are reduced to this. They cannot do anything else. They cannot do practical diplomacy and to be involved in international processes. They were restricted to this part of the international affairs where they can be. This is called at the microphone with one particular frequency, anti-Russian frequency. As soon as they start speaking about something else, this mic will be off. There are countries where, thanks to the leadership of the country, thanks to the activity of the public, or because democracy was not destroyed there, they pursue policy to preserve national interests. They use diplomacy and mechanism to interact, to find solutions to important issues, to protect their interests and respect others. There are countries that are not consistent things. Sometimes we wonder whether this is new kind of diplomacy. Because every day they say something different. Probably this is lack of professional skills in the sphere. The West is not homogeneous. Sometimes retain the tools of diplomacy, some not. Some use them for their own interests. We see this too. They use these instruments in a professional way, but they disregard the consequences that their policy has. So probably I'll try to reword the answer to you individually, so because it's really big and it's going to take a lot of time. Thanks to you. Is Almaydin with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. The delegation of volunteers from Lebanon visited Donetsk with a humanitarian mission. It supplied a second humanitarian cargo to Donbass. It was participated by the public organizations of the Arab countries and from Latin America. What do you think about the role of public organizations in strengthening relations between countries? The sustainability of people-to-people relations is the key to further development of world civilization. If this falters, global consequences will be seen all over the world, both in Russia and abroad. It ensures the channels for communication between countries and peoples. When instruments of classic diplomacy are undermined or destroyed, the voice of the public, of wider public, very loud voice is needed as never. We believe that the dialogue between the public facilitates trust and help people understand each other better. We welcome the initiatives of the public society at strengthening to strengthen ties with the CIS in Asia, in the Middle East, in Africa, and Latin America. Track is the establishment of dialogue platforms and NGOs. Without any doubt, this initiative should be based on equal rights, plural differences of opinions, and without trying to impose the only right position or opinion. From our side, we facilitate such initiatives. Thank you. Thanks to you. Is Rudolf with us?
Ms. Maria Zakharova.
Yes.
I have three questions, and my first question is: the peace process has been advancing in Turkey. A PKK group has laid down arms, and Turkey government has made a committee for the process as well. How does Russia see this process, and what could be the best possible strategy for both sides to solve the issue in a way that may lead to more peace in the region and country as well? So how do you think that this process will affect North and Syria, as Turkey has some tensions with autonomous administration in North and Syria? Thanks.
Вы знаете, Россия выступает в поддержку политического регулирования.
Russia supports political settlement of the existing problems. We proceed from the necessity to ensure peace and stability in certain countries and in the whole multinational and multi-confessional region. The situation there influences directly the security of our country.
Second question that I have is, we have seen some discussions between autonomous administration in North and Syria and Damascus government as well. According to the reports, the Kurds are asking for decentralization in governing Syria and Syrian democratic forces to be a category in Syrian army, not resolving into it. Damascus is opposing that. What could be the best possible strategy for them to agree on, and how does Russia think about Syrian democratic forces' demands and Damascus' response to it?
You know, I'll ask experts about it. Probably you can make your question more clear, because it is quite vague. I'll tell you I'll answer a question individually.
And my last question is, recently there have been some attacks on oil fields in Kurdistan region in Iraq, in which Russia has some interest, or their oil companies are working here. Moreover, there are some issues between KRG and Iraqi government. Some of it are related to oil. Both sides have had some discussions on the issues, but they have not been solved. How does Russia see the attacks on oil fields, and have you tried to mediate them in a way to solve those issues?
You know, if I may, can you give me more information of what kind of terror attacks and attacks abroad you mean, and I'll answer you later on.
There have been some attacks on
Я
oil fields
поняла.
in Kurdistan
Ответим.
region of Iraq.
Да, подготовим.
Oh yes, I will prepare answers to you. We'll send them to you.
For the answers of those three questions.
Хорошо, спасибо.
Thanks to you.
Nice.
Is Голос Отечества with us? Good afternoon. Голос Отечества. My name is Shalikhov Oleg. We have two questions. Madam Zakharova, recently, Germany sees more frequent statements from politicians and military representatives with hostile narratives against Russia, including the discussion of using force against the Kaliningrad region. Besides, there is alarming renewal of certain symbolic practices. What does MFA think about it? You said that they are things reminiscing and reincarnation of those things that was not achieved in the first thought of the 20th century. They attempt to do it at a new technological level. They need resources. They're going to fight for this for all their life. It's not only about statements that concern not only our region. We see various experimental ideas. We hear them from them. It's the aspiration to dominate in the world, to own all resources, to destroy the national identity of peoples and sovereignty of states, to subjugate societies, countries, and people. And they want first and foremost their resources. Now, because of the information and communication technologies, their development give them, as many ideologists say, possibility to make people in many countries dependent, not only through force, but by putting pressure on them, by influencing them through the AI, from what used to seem a conspiracy theory. Every person understands that now, especially those using the Western technologies. They understand that they don't possess their wishes, they don't manage their wishes and technologies. Different technologies are applied. But this is yet another attempt to put neocolonialism at a new level with new opportunities to subjugate peoples and nations and to rule the world. It is described in various ways. It was implemented differently in the world history under various flags and symbols. But now it is done at a new technological level. Thank you. Question 2. Madam Zakharova, what can you say about the fact that the US and EU, while introducing sanctions against third countries for supplying armaments to the zones of conflicts, actively arm Ukraine, including through European logistical centers? That is violating the international law. Your warnings is very good. While supplying at an unprecedented level the Kiev regime with armaments, the US and the EU violate all political and legal commitments. What is even more surprising, in majority of cases, they initiated this approach that such supplies are unacceptable, and they were the first to violate them. And they started to treat these commitments and in a bad way and disregard them. This is the Washington revoked its signature under the International Treaty on Armaments Trade. The document provides for the ban on providing licenses on armaments exports if they create clear risks to be used for internal repressions or will lead to acts of violence against women and children, will facilitate or the escalation of armed conflicts in other countries. Similar restrictions are provided by export and control regimes, in particular mercenary agreements. Washington, Brussels support them. But this is all forgotten. If the current situation requires so. The OSCE document principles regulating ordinary armament is there, but the West keeps silent about it. Thank you. Thanks to you. Are there any more questions? No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I wish you all the best. See you. Goodbye.